fried. Deep fat fried. Deep fat fried. Deep fat fried. Deep fat fried.
Welcome to Deep Fat Fried. It's the Monday show. It's the public show. We do private shows every Friday for patrons only. So if you're not a patron and you want double the content, just become a patron and you can fucking have it. It's really more than double because there's so much cool shit.
Oh, yeah.
Like
the pre-post show we
right
just
now.
did.
Yeah, like we just shot the pre-post show. And
post-show.
Also, we shot over the weekend the Dank Dungeons and Drunken Dragons third episode. That's going to be coming out real soon.
Tell all our secrets, TJ.
Just being edited right now.
It was crazy.
I think it was probably the best one so far. I think we've made it our goal to make each one a little bit better than the one before it, and so far I think we've accomplished that.
Yep,
thanks in
no
small part to Paul's inventive storytelling and impressive DMing. In fact, some people have told us that Paul's DMing skills are on the level of like some of the top DMs out there and shit.
Wow.
So,
I would disagree. My knowledge of the rules is pretty bad, but I like the character part of it, and that's where we have fun.
I think that it's really just your talent as a storyteller that shines through there. But yeah, maybe Paul's grasp of the rules isn't perfect, but what the fuck ever. Who cares?
I'm learning.
We play fast and loose. But the point is, it's fucking awesome, and a new one's coming out soon, and it's only going to be for patrons, so if you're not a patron, you might want to consider doing that. I know we push the patronship pretty hard, but it's because we really fucking want you there. We really want you to be part of something bigger than yourself for once in your miserable fucking life. Huh?
Indeed.
Also, thank you to all the people who wrote in and wished well to Chelsea, my wife, who had some illness issues. She's doing much better. She's fine now. Thank you guys for your concerns. But enough of that horse shit. It's time for a fucking show. But as usual, there's a little pre-show banter. So, Scotty, kick it off. What do you want to talk about before the show starts, huh, buddy?
Spotlight on me.
Football to you, Scotty.
How about the team, guys?
How about that team?
Team doing good.
That team?
Oh, dude, I got the obligatory, there's always at least, a couple of people that'll bring up this shit. If the Saints are losing a game, it's like, how about them Saints? I just want to say, how about them Saints, bitches?
That's true. Saints
Still
did
in it.
win.
Whereas your little shit-ass fucking team is gone. We're the Raiders at home. We're the Eagles
I mean,
at
the Raiders
home now.
never left home. I'm fine with it.
Yeah. Well, who knows what's going to happen with them? But
Nothing.
Who even wants the Raiders to be a Super Bowl caliber team? I don't even think their fans really want that.
Happen.
They do. They want it. Trust me.
They do.
Dude, you want to see how bad they want it? Go to a Raiders home game and talk shit and see what happens.
No.
I'm good.
My understanding is that Raiders fans are a particular breed of crazy.
I ain't going to do that.
The best feeling in the world is being decked out in fucking silver and black at fucking Oko with the stomping ass fan, because you know that is a mob of people that will kill anyone that stands among them except you, because you have the right colors on. It's a great feeling. I can see why gangs are so drawn to sports memorabilia and stuff, because they want to keep that feeling going.
Yeah.
Because, dude, being drunk at a fucking Raiders game in Raiders gear is something that I wish every fan of every football team would be humble enough to experience. Because most fans would balk at throwing a Raiders jersey on and sneaking into a Raiders game. But I'm telling you, if you did, you'd experience
are they gonna
true
lose that?
power.
The problem with that, though, is, they're moving from Oakland, so eventually that might leave with them. I mean, maybe it stays, but I don't know. In Las Vegas, is that going to keep going, wherever the fuck it ends up going?
I know that Las Vegas wants that team, and I know that they're going to be able to dump way more money on that team than fucking Oakland can. So,
well, that's for certain.
Yeah, we'll just have to see. I mean,
but
it's
with such a transient population, because it's a tourist town, will they be able to come up with a steady sort of support base for that? I mean, I know a lot of people do live in Vegas, but
yeah,
at any given time, a huge portion of the population of the town are, out-of-towners, people who are just there for a week or two, going to a convention or just there to do some gambling.
Might
or
play
see
well
some
for them, though. I
shows
don't
or
know.
Whatever. I mean, it kind of almost you advise them for like maybe this is America's team because they're in America's biggest tourist city. So, maybe they become the team of the people. And maybe everyone will get to experience
America's team, dude.
Some
You know what?
bastardization of that Raiders magic.
The Cowboys already kind of have that going on, dude. So I don't know about the two America's teams. Maybe they can earn maybe they can worm their way into the heart of the
Yeah,
American.
but
Every
really-
team wants to be America's team. There is no America's
At the end of the
team.
day,
That's what they call the Cowboys, dude. I'm
At the end of the
telling
day,
you.
though, is America really Cowboys anymore, or are we more like Raiders?
Oh.
I think we're more like Raiders.
Well, I
at
think
this
we've
point.
always been more like Raiders. I
Yeah.
think that's why Raiders fans are the true fans because we embody
true
everything
fans, the
about
true
piracy.
fans.
We love it when our team fouls your team and puts
That's
one
true.
of your team's
I've
fucking
never
players
seen a
out for the
team take
season.
more delight
We
in
love it.
just
Oh
injuring
God,
people
man.
and playing
if
rough
we,
and
if
cheating.
if you have this bright young quarterback that's just killing it and we snap his fucking leg, dude, in a personal foul or something, dude, we'll take whatever penalty. I don't care. We'll lose the game. I don't care. We won. We won because we're the fucking Raiders. We left our mark on you.
Yeah,
now
man,
for the
what
rest of that
season?
fucking season, you're gonna
just
hobble.
go.
You're gonna hoppity hoppity hoppity
Hey, Mouse.
hoppity hoppity. That's
How's
right.
How's that working out for the Raiders, Paul?
I don't care. Like I said, but they don't care about winning. They've already
Oh
won.
yeah, they don't care about winning.
How many fouls-
Raiders
how-
record
hey.
4-12.
How many fouls
4
did
and
they get off?
12.
How many fouls did they get off?
I don't
this year?
know. You know what, Paul? Because at the end of the day, they
How
didn't
many
win
fouls?
shit.
How many fouls did they get off?
Who cares?
They won the most
They
fouls
lost.
award.
Yeah, they won
Hey,
the
dude,
fucking.
we Raiders fans have had to give
I don't
up
think
on
they're
winning.
even. You know what,
Now-
Paul? You know
now
what's
winning
sad?
is a different
They're
thing
not even
to
the
a
most
Raiders fan.
penalized team in football anymore, Paul. So everything you're talking about, it's just it's
Hey.
maybe in the
They've
80s.
just gotten better at getting away with
Paul's
it.
just living in the past now. This is a nostalgia thing. Maybe in the 80s and 90s, those were the Raiders.
They've
Paul,
just gotten
those
sneakier.
Raiders went bye-bye. Now they have John Gruden and a losing record.
Can I just say
They suck
I was
now.
way more interested in football back when there was less emphasis placed on safety. Like,
Well, yeah.
I understand that these
Duh.
guys, they get.
CT.
Are you telling me the Gladiator Arena had a point? Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, I mean, like, look,
Of course it does.
I mean, these guys already
I mean-
make a shit ton of money. I think they should just take the personal risk
I don't think that's. I mean, whatever. I don't think
for
that's
the
necessarily
sake
true.
of my entertainment.
I guess they should probably make way more money if they're going to take that risk. Then
Yeah, just raise the minimum wage for the players. Every player has to make at least fucking $3 million a year.
Yeah, I think the minimum salary in the NFL right now is like $500,000.
Yeah, just raise it up to $3 million, but get rid of all the rules protecting them. So and let them know up front.
no
you know?
helmets, no pads. Just get out there and kill each other.
Yeah, because I mean,
No
how
shoes.
much more fun would that be? But unfortunately, society's moving in the opposite direction. so
actually,
my sensibilities
you're
become more and more
describing-
obsolete.
What you're describing actually would become safer because people knowing they don't have the helmet and pads, they would actually play less aggressively.
All right, well,
Lesser teams would.
we're gonna
the Raiders, though,
You know what we're gonna do then?
would
We're gonna
take
amp them
advantage
up
of
on
that soft.
fucking speed.
Yeah,
and,
give them speed and give them called like look, we've invented this new polymer. It can be real or not. Like it makes it you can hit even harder now with less damage and safer.
Yeah.
But it's actually worse.
until people are routinely dying in these games, football is
Yeah,
fucking
if there's not at least like
pussies.
2
That's how
deaths
I
on
feel.
each team during the game, like and the punter was hit so hard by the this other player that
I want to
he-
hear them say he
unfortunately-
took his head off on that play, but it be real.
Yeah, have an actual head roll by.
Yeah. And maybe if you maybe there could be some way like, hey, you completed 20 passes in a row. Now someone on your team gets the axe, and they just give them a battle axe to go on the field with, and they're allowed to chop up the other
Dude,
team.
it sounds like we're combining football and the running man at this point.
I kind of like it.
I'm okay with it.
Dude, that's where sports need to go, man. We need the running. Look, the Running Man was it's a pretty terrible movie, but if we can take that, some good principles,
terribly awesome, maybe.
if we take some of the good principles from that film and combine it with modern football, we can have something that's truly beautiful.
All right. Well, we're not talking about football today. What we're talking about is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, Mr. Stanley Kubrick. So let's
Yes, indeed.
delve right into that topic.
So my favorite director of all time. I think we are all doing this.
Whoa,
right?
it's like
We've
a
all
demon.
chosen our favorite
Yes.
directors.
Although
and-
mine is going to be a little. I'm doing one on a director that is actually terrible, but whatever. We'll get to that later.
That's true.
Mine is going to be a little separate from your guys's because of some weird scheduling stuff, but whatever. We're doing a couple directors this week, and we're going to revisit the director topic a little bit later on.
Dude,
don't you just want to pinch his little cheeks?
Stanley Kubrick is a terrifying child.
Yes.
Yeah. TJ said he looks like he
looks like a chubby little vampire.
yeah.
He looks like
those.
Nosferatu Jr. or some shit.
So he was born July 26, 1928 in
Allegedly.
Manhattan, New York City. In looking up about his life, I found that he was notoriously tight-lipped, and so we can't really rely on a lot of direct sources. So rather than just try and talk about Stanley Kubrick's life, which was very shrouded in mystery, I thought we'd look at Stanley Kubrick's life through the lens of his movies.
Right.
And
because that's where he actually expressed himself.
yeah. And that's where he spoke most loudly about the things that scared him and the things that he was interested in. And I think that if you're going to analyze this particular person, to not do it through the lens of his own films, I think would be doing a great discredit to him, who clearly valued his own privacy.
Right.
So knowing all of the particulars about Stanley Kubrick is not really what this is about. We do have some anecdotes from family members. He was considered intelligent in school despite his poor grades. He never found an academic pursuit that challenged him or engaged him in any way. And his father was kind of desperate to find something because Stanley was doing so poorly in school, but he could tell that he was such a bright kid to make him, for him to latch on to intellectually. And he sent his, in desperation, he sent Stanley all the way across the country to Pasadena, California to stay with his uncle in 1940, hoping that being away from home and being with his uncle would...
His uncle's name, by the way, was Martin Perveler.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know if you should send your kid to live with his uncle.
Uncle Perveler.
Perveler.
Yeah, Uncle Perveler would probably not be the dude I'd send my child to.
This is a really common thing with a lot of people who are considered like great in their field. They're great figures. Like academically, it's like it almost looks like they're really poor at what they do, but it's usually they're just very bored. It's like it doesn't capture their attention. It doesn't capture the great mind you have here. It's like you take this one size fits all approach to education that we've so roundly criticized, and look at like Stanley Kubrick and
well, to take
if you looked at him from that perspective, is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
he's a failure. He's like, oh, he's just some kid that can't do shit.
If you take a look at another personality that I think is similar to his, what's his goddamn name?
I don't know.
I fucking hate it, dude. I hate having somebody's name. God damn it, Daniel Johnston.
Right.
Musical genius. Really understood. Never did well in school, despite being really incandescently brilliant and great at language. His parents did kind of the same thing to him when he was young. Sent him to live with a relative, hoping that change of scenery and the shock of it would kind of wake him up. And found similar results. It didn't work. And so Stanley moved home to the Bronx to finish the last year of grammar school, having really learned nothing in Pasadena.
Right. And I mean, look, obviously this is a guy who his big passion in life was filmmaking. And what exposure is he getting to something like that going to school? Nothing.
Well, and not only that, but at this point in his life, he didn't even know that was his passion. He was aimless.
He hadn't discovered it.
Yeah, this kid was like Stanley. Unlike a lot of other directors, doesn't have a past. Now it does say that he used to cut school to go see movies, so clearly he was aware of film.
Right. So he obviously had some love of film.
There's nothing to say that he was directly interested in making them himself until he started to do it. So his father finally found something that would become a lifelong passion of Stanley's, and it really had nothing to do with movies. It was chess.
Yes.
He introduced his son to chess. And Stanley immediately took to it like a duck to water and became really, really adept at playing it and was obsessed with it his whole life. And we'll talk about some instances where chess was useful to him and some of the motifs that he used in his film.
Cool.
But a little later into his teen years, he similarly kept struggling.
I feel like you can see chess, the chess mentality in his films, too. Like, there is that sort of... He's a very methodical man in terms of how he directed his films.
Very strategic, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, you usually don't think about filmmakers as necessarily employing a strategy, but you definitely feel that from Kubrick. Like, he's a very strategic thinker. He's a very logical thinker. And as you said, one of the reasons you didn't pull any interviews for him for this thing is because... there's no passion in the interviews. It's very flat.
I mean,
very
there is
blank.
passion. You can tell he cares about his movies and what he's talking about,
Right.
but he is a very flat communicator. He hated doing interviews. One of the quotes that I found for him was, the stupidest thing a man can do is give an interview when he doesn't have a movie coming out.
Right.
He just thought the questions sucked. He hated doing it. He was not an in front of the camera personality. He was not one of these directors that wanted this big public persona and big public recognition, and he'd want to give important talks at places. He wanted to just be alone and make films.
Yeah.
With his family, you know,
But you did say there was another passion he developed in his teenage years as well.
So his father proved adept at finding things that would occupy young Stanley's mind, and he got him a camera for his 13th birthday, and that proved to be probably the most profound thing that anybody ever did for him. He immediately took to it, became an avid photographer, started taking pictures. I think I've got a picture of him, TJ.
Taking some pictures.
Young Stanley Kubrick. This would have been, his later teen years, but with a small point and shoot camera, and it became his passion. He started sending pictures to Look magazine in New York and got some feature spreads and started making money on the side as a teenager, doing photographer work.
Right, and at the age of 17, he became an apprentice photographer.
Yep.
So, I mean, this was really his. It was really the gift of that camera on his 13th birthday that ultimately ignited something within him that led him down the path that he took in life.
Well, he was famous for saying that if it can be imagined or conceived of in the mind, it can be filmed, and I think that that's really what he was passionate about. It was he realized that camera was a whole different world inside of the real world.
Right.
That he could make those pictures say whatever he wanted. And that desire to take that medium and storytell with it would drive the rest of his entire life. He was on the staff at Look magazine. He started going to film screenings in between, jobs for Look. And in 1950, he shot a short documentary about the run-up to a boxing match. Was released by RKO, called The Day of the Fight, and it was released in 1951.
This is his first foray into to filmmaking, right?
Yes, this was the first film that he ever released commercially.
I believe we have a trailer for that.
We do.
So let's take. Oh, actually,
it's actually just a lot. We can watch a little bit of it.
We have the complete film, I think, or at least a big portion.
It's available on YouTube, so you can.
So, let's just take a look at that real quick. Photography, Stanley Kubrick. Produced and directed by Stanley Kubrick. All events depicted in this film are true. True enough.
This is the story of a fight.
So
this already does this. This is already just like this is
what
not
I'm
a documentary. Saying. This is a staged.
This is
picture.
what I'm saying. The first frame of film that Stanley Kubrick releases is this beautiful shot of a street in New York, and where he's made it look like a paper that somebody has discarded has blown up against a light post to introduce a documentary about a welterweight fighter that nobody fucking remembers. I watched all of these documentary films. There are 3 of them. We're only going to take a look at this one because, they're unremarkable in content other than the fact that they are composed so beautifully like this. They're worth watching if you're into Stanley Kubrick, not for the storytelling or the subject matter, really.
Is what you're talking about.
The cinematography is so beautiful and on point in these films.
Walter Cartier.
I mean, yeah, I've seen stuff produced in this time period before, and it does not look or feel like this.
You have to take it into account.
Maybe this,
too.
maybe some of the B-roll shit that obviously they
Sure.
shot, but that's just a more interesting opening than you see for. A lot of documentaries.
You can tell that he had an eye,
and you
for
can
this.
really see it throughout his films. But yeah, even this early example is just for the time period, this is very well shot and produced.
This is 1951,
and you have to remember too, this is pretty much an assignment. It's kind of just okay, go cover this fight. It doesn't even have to be like this. It could probably just be like a very generic thing. It would have been acceptable.
Right.
Well, he's obviously trying to show off.
He definitely at this point in his life was interested in being a
begins
filmmaker.
The toughest part of being a boxer, the waiting. Walter is on the right of Vincent, his identical twin. He doesn't mind the hard training, the 4 miles of road work every day, as much as the waiting. Walter knows that each bout is more important than the one before because he's rapidly climbing to the middleweight championship of the world and he must keep winning. It's a long way until night. Walter, wearing the bow tie, is 24. He's a native of New York and a fighter as far back as he can remember. His father is away, and when he was a little boy, he lost his mother. Walter began to do exhibition boxing with his brother Vincent when they were 3 years old. During the war, they fought exhibitions
And, you know, each one of these guys weren't just walking somewhere. You know, so Stanley
Right.
has composed...
all of this, I mean, like, this might be based on true events or whatever,
Right.
but this is... All of
feels
these
like a
shots
film.
are clearly staged.
Yeah, and he's chosen these interesting backgrounds. His framing is just on point in every one of them. It's beautifully shot, and that's the reason why I would recommend anybody that's a fan of Stanley's to go and watch these early documentaries. They are all available in their totality on YouTube, free.
Anything that Stanley Kubrick composed is composed about as perfect as you can imagine, like, and throughout any of his films, and this is no exception.
Yeah, and aside from this film, which is called, once again, Day of the Fight, the others are, Flying Padre,
Yep.
Padra, and The Seafarers.
Yep, and I watched both of these. The Flying Padre is kind of a Western documentary about a religious group out. Like I said, none of these documentaries are interesting in content. They're interesting in composition. A lot of the shots from Flying Padre, it's about racing cars.
If you're just a connoisseur of good cinematography, then these are good early examples.
I mean, having the benefit of hindsight, you can just totally see it too. It's like this is made like a film, because a lot of documentaries have a feeling of like you're just following people around. This is like you said, this is more like, this feels like you're watching a movie. If they had dubbed this with something else, like these two guys are off to fucking go plan their bank robbery or whatever, you'd buy it.
Right. He used these short documentary pieces to show off his cinematography. And with that backing him, and according to some sources, hustling chess games in Central Park, he was able to get enough money and influence together to make his first nonfiction film, which is Fear and Desire.
Let's take a gander at that. Kino Lorber.
We were so well prepared for death. Waiting. Waiting to kill. Waiting to heal. Waiting to die. One by one, the men turned black.
Racist.
Then they were dead. And they knew it. I cannot quite admit that it is I who am creating slaughter in this abyss.
So I actually, in prep for this, went and finished all of the movies that I hadn't seen of Stanley Kubrick's, and this was one of them.
Right.
I watched it night before last.
So what did you think of it overall?
I kind of feel the same way about this film as I felt about the documentaries that preceded it.
Right.
It has some actual really powerful moments, and you could see in the trailer his use of lighting was already
Right. Exquisite
and beautiful in there, and it's really worth watching for the sumptuousness of his cinematography. The story itself is interesting. It's an unnamed, so it's a conflict, but you never know between which nations. So it's a conflict between nations that are completely unnamed.
So it's kind of there's kind of a thing where he doesn't want you to take a side based on like jingoism or anything like that.
Right.
It's supposed to just kind of examine war from a sort of like
Humanist point
neutral
of view.
perspective,
Right.
because you're not invited to take any side.
And that's really what it is. It's about a group of soldiers from an unnamed nation who crash land in their plane on the enemy side of the battle lines, basically, and have to try and quietly and covertly make their way back to friendly territory. On the way, they meet a woman, and the way that they treat her and the way that she becomes a commodity amongst them as they're pinned down by this enemy general that knows that they're in the area is kind of the examination of the film.
Yeah, it's more about human nature, is what you're
Right.
saying. It's not about like the conflict. It's about what happens to people. And how
It's
these
about the
things
human
affect them.
side of those conflicts and
Yeah.
what happens in these untold stories behind enemy lines when these people die and are forgotten and are never supposed to be there in the first place. It's an interesting film. Definitely not my favorite of his, but you could already see. And like I said, this is 1953. If you look at movies that are made in 1953, they don't look like this movie does. And there's a reason for that. He had an eye for staging and lighting that people didn't have at the time. It was new and it was fresh. And this built his reputation amongst filmmakers, this first film. His next two films are Killer's Kiss and The Killing. They were released in 1955 and 56, respectively. I watched both of these films as well. And I feel like I like them both a little bit less than Fear and Desire. Killer's Kiss is, I think he kind of was inspired by The Day of the Fight, which is that first documentary that he made, because Killer's Kiss follows like a middling welterweight boxer trying to box his way up the ranks, but he's not really genuinely good enough. And then he falls in love with a woman who happens to be a mobster's woman, and he's horribly abusive towards her, and this boxer isn't, and he falls in love and has to escape the town because this mobster is trying to have him killed. So it's like a underworld romance kind of film.
Here he is shooting the film.
Yep.
And you can see that he is manning the camera himself.
And you can see what he's focused in on there as well, and that he is clearly enjoying the shot. I mean, this is there's a lot of this kind of, and you saw this a lot in the 1950s, this overt, like, look at my breasts kind of sexuality.
Yeah.
Always turtlenecked sexuality, but clearly the breasts are there and very prominent.
Right.
So there's a lot of that.
There's always been a sensuousness to a lot of his movies, too.
The acting is not fantastic in this film. That's another thing that was kind of, I think, lacking back in the day, especially for a small-time director. He didn't have access to the talent, and you could tell that, it just wasn't there.
Let's take a little gander at the trailer for that. I don't know if we need to watch the whole thing or not, but I like this opening shot of endless blackness.
Blackness, yes.
These
These are like old theatrical trailers, so.
Okay. Is there supposed to be pictures
Yes,
of this?
there will be.
Okay.
Hits with the gut
There we
shock
go.
of a knockout punch. A picture as brazen as the naked bulbs of Broadway.
Naked
and as hard
bulbs.
as the New York streets where it was shot.
Can't you get it, Vinny? To me, you're just an old man.
All right, I see what you mean.
Smell bad.
Yeah.
I could kill you right here and now.
Oh, I don't think you will.
Okay, I kind of like that guy.
He's actually one of the holdout good actors in this film, and he's a central character as well.
Well, that's good.
I don't remember what his name is,
He was
but
lost as
he's
soon
good.
as he
Pretty much
looked
everybody
at her.
else isn't.
Well, this is not. I mean, obviously, every film Kubrick made is important, but this one probably not too much.
I mean, like I said, I don't regret the time that I spent watching it.
Yeah.
But
I've muted the audio for the audience, by the way,
Sure.
so they can.
I mean, I
totally
think
hear us.
I think it's essential, and this kind of shows the progression as a filmmaker. It's like I think it was always an element in Stanley Kubrick of wanting that kind of mainstream appeal. I think in a sense, like, he definitely wanted his films to be seen by a larger audience.
he was trying to get cachet, and he was
Yeah.
making films that were popular at the time because he realized, in order to get the type of freedom to make the type of films,
You have
that,
to make commercials,
Right.
successful films.
and that's
as
what
well.
these first films are. This is from the set, I believe, of The Killing,
Yes, it is.
which is just kind of it's a heist film, basically. heist and investigation film, which was probably very popular at this time.
So at this point, he's making popular genre films to try to get that name recognition.
To make the films he truly wants to make.
We don't know what his thought process was
Right,
at this
you
time.
can't. There's no. I mean, the thing about Kubrick is that there's no real window into his psyche, where his mind is at. You can only speculate.
Right. I mean, and he's given some, like I said, he's given some interviews. I watched a great number of them in prep for this, and he didn't like revealing his process. He didn't like talking about his personal life and his personal feelings about things. He liked talking about filmmaking and how he made the movie and the actors that were in the movie. And that doesn't reveal a whole lot about his background process. So at this time, I would like to think that he was just showcasing his cinematography, showcasing his eye, and hoping that that would be enough to elevate him to a greater position.
And apparently, The Killing is the film that in 1956 that brought him to the attention of Hollywood.
Yes.
That really, because let's just take a look at it. This is The Killing. Oops. Whoa. All right.
Give or take a few thousand. I figure the loot on this deal at $2 million. There should be that much in the track offices. Great big dollar sign there where most women have a heart. So play it smart. Stay in character and you'll have money. Plenty of it. George will have it. He'll blow it all on you.
Johnny, I'm no good for anybody else. I'm not pretty.
Yeah,
it feels like Stanley Kubrick knew that he had to get people's attention. Like you really have to make a name for yourself in the world. And it seems like that's what he was doing with this. I don't think that, in my estimation, there was a lack of I mean, I think he obviously knows it's a very commercial project. I don't think he was really hesitant to move away from just commercial projects. But I think it was also the recognition is that how do you get from that position to make the other films that he wants to make and the other stories that he's interested in wants to tell.
I can tell you, just listen to the dialogue from this trailer, that's pretty standard dialogue for the era. It's not standout. It's not like, oh my God, wow.
There are some great moments, some great lines, but it is very stilted like a lot of 1950s movie dialogue is. He was very much making genre films. That's how I feel about these. I feel like they're slightly better shot genre films from that period of time. Heist movies, The Maltese Falcon, that type of feel.
Yeah, the main standout is the cinematography. I agree with you.
He caught the eye of this gentleman, Kirk Douglas, who at this time was the biggest movie star in the world. And Kirk Douglas got him the job basically directing Paths of Glory. So it was his work on The Killing and Killer's Kiss that got the eye of Kirk Douglas. He wanted to work with him. He got him the job. For this movie, Paths to Glory is obviously a vehicle for Kirk Douglas, if you've ever seen it. He's absolutely the central focus of the film.
But is it as good as, what was that movie we watched? Saturn 3 or some shit?
It's a smidge better. This is a great movie. This is, I feel, Stanley Kubrick's first truly great film. It is a controversial movie, which would be a hallmark of his career going forward. Due to its anti-war, it was very critical of the military.
Right.
It's a movie about...
Which is a recurring motif in Kubrick's films, too.
Right. It's a World War I film about the French military and their fight against the Germans. And Lieutenant Dax, played by the dashing Kirk Douglas here, is the leader of a large platoon of men who are engaged in trench warfare, which I guess victory was sometimes measured in inches. If you could move your trench an inch, it was a good thing. And he gets this outlandish order. His men are all tired from the constant fighting. He gets this outlandish order from a general saying, I want you to take that hill. His men valiantly try to do it, but are cut to pieces by the enemy guns, and they start to retreat. The general that ordered the attack in the first place orders the artillery to fire on his own men as retribution. And that's really what this film is about. That general wants to blame his men for cowardice and forces him to pick 3 men, or I think it's 4 men, that are to be executed for cowardice. and he represents them. So it's like a courtroom drama, basically. Controversial, like I said at the time, especially in military circles, for its naked criticism of the military.
Well, that sounds awesome. Let's take a look at the trailer for that.
Like me to suggest what you can do with that promotion.
Colonel Dax, you will apologize at once or I shall be placed under arrest.
I apologize for not being entirely honest with you. I apologize for not revealing my true feelings. I apologize, sir, for not telling you sooner that you're a degenerate, sadistic old man. And you can go to hell before I apologize to you now or ever again.
That was cool.
Since the publication of the book 25 years ago, no one dared to make this movie. It was too shocking, too frank.
What sort of casualties do you anticipate, sir?
Say 5% killed by our own barrage. It's a very generous allowance. 10% more in getting through no man's land, and 20% more getting through the wire. That leaves 65%, with the worst part of the job over. Let's say another 25% in actually taking the anthill. We're still left with a force more than adequate to hold it.
General, you're saying that more than half my men will be killed.
Aside from the inescapable fact that a good many of your men never left the trenches, there's the question of the troops' morale. Don't forget that.
The troops' morale, sir?
Certainly. These executions will be a perfect tonic for the entire division. There are few things more fundamentally encouraging and stimulating than seeing someone else die.
Where in heaven's name are they? On the left. Where are the rest? 0+1 and they're still in the trenches. They're not advancing. Miserable cowards. They're not advancing. The barrage is getting away from them. They're still in the trenches. Captain Nichols.
Yes, sir?
Order the 75s to commence firing on our own positions.
It's just so rare to see a fucking film, even today, that doesn't paint the military as anything but this force of good defending. Oh, and then to take this very realistic look where it's like, it just shows you these soldiers are just numbers. Oh, the 25% of the soldiers will die, and it's just very callous, and it's just very just telling of what the reality of war is, which is just a bunch of old men making calculations about how they can keep enough of their force to basically win the war at the end of it.
Yeah. It's during the filming of this this movie that Stanley found a use for chess. That French general that he calls a sadist and a degenerate at the beginning, played by a French actor named Philippe Monjou, who was notoriously fickle and didn't like Stanley's style of making actors do multiple retakes. He would often ask actors to do 20 or 30 retakes of a shot with no feedback and no breaks in between. And Philippe Monjou had enough one day and went off on Stanley, cussing him out and freaking out. And I will not stand for this. I will not do this. Stanley let him rant and rave. And then right at the end of it, just took him by his hand and pulled him over to a chessboard that he had set up on the set and played a round of chess against him, beat his ass at it. And I guess at the end of that, Philippe was ready to work again.
Right.
It sapped all that passion out of him and all that angst, and it put it in the form of a tactile game.
Yeah, and also it just says to people, I'm your intellectual superior. You're coming at me with this emotional argument, but let's see you actually put it into practice and actually defeat me intellectually.
Yes.
And they can't do it.
Right.
So it's disarming.
It's disarming, and it provides a channel for all that negative emotion.
Right.
It puts it into a game. It makes a game of it.
And it gives them a chance, although it sounds like based on his chess skills, they didn't really have much of a chance. But
no, they didn't.
It gives them a chance
was the point.
To feel like I'm going to fucking prevail over this son of a bitch.
Right.
But they can't do it.
I definitely agree with you. I mean, based on the other films we've seen, just look at the way this battlefield is set up. Everything about this has
the dialogue in the film. I mean, it doesn't sound like your typical 1957 fucking movie.
This is the first film where he had a roster of really wonderful actors to work with, and everybody in this movie is standout good.
There's good suspension of disbelief. I mean, the set pieces. I mean, this is a movie that I can see why you'd highly recommend, Paul.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely great. Like I said, all of the young men that are condemned from his platoon that have to wait for their sentencing and trial and execution, they are all standout great in this film as well. It's just a great movie. It was during the filming of this movie that he met his second wife. His first wife was a high school sweetheart, and that marriage did not survive the filming of his first movie, Fear and Desire. His second wife. And, well, actually, no, sorry, this would be his third wife.
Okay.
I didn't pull all the wives that he took because, like I said, he was notoriously tight-lipped about his personal life. But he met this young lady here. You want to put her up on screen for the folks?
Sure.
Let's see. Let me get her. So she's a very small part in this film. At the very end, and I think it bears mentioning, it's a really powerful scene. She's brought out, she's a German, and she's brought out in front of all of these raucous French soldiers who are in a tavern after a long battle and drinking. And it's a very heavy atmosphere. She's weeping, she's crying, and the implication is that they're going to make her strip or make her do something horrible or rape her or throw things at her and jeering because she's German. And they ask her to sing a song, and you think it's going to be to mock, but she starts singing, and everybody goes quiet. All of these raucous soldiers go silent, and they listen to her for a little while, and then one by one, they all start singing with her. It's a statement of common humanity. Stanley fell in love with this young German actress here, Christine Harlan, and he married her in 1958. So.
Let's see. She stayed with her for a long time.
Yes.
As well, 40 years it says, till his death.
Yep. So she was.
That was it for
so
him.
she was really the one for him.
And
basically.
she became an integral part of his filmmaking too. She would film a lot of behind the scenes thing. His daughter actually would do that as well. So his family members were all involved in his process and probably had a whole lot more to say about the man. But once again, I think they all respect his privacy and don't.
Respect the fact that he wasn't upfront with that, so
right.
They're not gonna go and be like, let's write a tell-all or some shit.
But this was the first taste that Stanley got of censorship, and he hated it. He was really rankled by how censored this first film was, or this film in particular was. In France, both active and retired personnel from the French military vehemently criticized the film and its portrayal of the French army after it was released in Belgium. The French government placed enormous pressure on the United Artists, the European arm of their distribution, not to release the film in France. The film eventually was shown in France in 1975 when social attitudes had changed.
So a long time afterwards.
Especially how weak they're intellectually. It's like Stanley Kubrick yet again intellectually defeated the people. By the very fact that all these times that we talk about the military, it's like, oh, we're defending your freedom. But
that's
then,
that's not.
But
even
then
all.
but then someone else throws their hat in their opinion about like, this is my opinion about war and what happened, and then it's like, no, we need to censor you. It's like, so you guys get to have your jingoistic shit till the end of time, big parades. I mean, that's pervasive throughout those cultures. But then someone else has a different idea, and that's immediately shut down. No, you're not allowed to have that idea or have that opinion.
Yeah, and that wasn't the only censorship it incurred either. It says here in Germany, the film was withdrawn from the Berlin Film Festival to avoid straining relations with France.
Oh, okay.
It was censored in Spain.
It wasn't shown until 11 years after Franco's death in Spain.
Yeah, Francisco Franco, who was, I guess, the head of the right-wing government at the time. In Switzerland, the film was censored at request of the Swiss Army until 1970. At American bases in Europe, the American military banned it from being shown. So this film was so controversial that, like, you practically couldn't show it in a huge swath of Europe at the time because it was just too triggering for the fucking snowflakes of the time.
Yep. So Stanley was really rankled by this critique and censorship of his work. But his collaboration with Kirk Douglas would prove to be a fruitful one, as Kirk Douglas found himself on the set of a very beleaguered production of Spartacus.
Right.
Spartacus's first director, I don't know if I took down his name, honestly. Yeah, David Lean, who directed 1957's The Bridge Over the River Kwai, which is actually a pretty good film.
Movie. Good film, yeah.
He turned down an offer to direct. Laurence Olivier was asked but declined. Douglas believed that the original director, Anthony Mann, was scared of the large scope of the film, and he also didn't like how close he was to the British actors in the film, so he fired him. This shows you how much power Douglas had and actors had at this time in Hollywood, where they could literally... I mean, I guess there's probably a few actors that could get a director fired nowadays.
But not a lot. You have to be at the tippy top of the game.
But Kirk Douglas was
the top
absolutely
of a Twitter
in
mob.
control. And it is kind of, I don't know if this is a rumor or if this is true, but the rumor is that Kirk Douglas, after working with Stanley on Past to Glory, felt that Stanley would be a malleable director.
Right.
That would acquiesce to his every little whim as an actor and allow him to kind of make the movie.
I'm going to guess
almost like
based
Kirk
on
Douglas
Stanley
directs the movie.
Kubrick's fucking. I'm assuming that did not work
Wrong.
out for Kirk.
He was
Douglas.
hoping that Kubrick would be daunted, like the previous director, Mann,
By the
was
scope.
by the scope, and he would, bow down. He was sorely mistaken.
No, Kubrick just rose to the occasion. It's because you got to believe that a film of this scale was what Kubrick was really waiting for.
I mean, this was his first giant budget movie. I mean, and this at the time was the biggest budget that had ever been thrown at a film in the history of films.
Right.
And Stanley Kubrick has all of that money. Of course, he's going to do it his way.
If you've seen this film, it's evident what you can see at the time, because I think it was made in 1960.
Yes, 1960.
Yeah, 1960, and the scale of this film is huge.
There's a great anecdote that comes from this film. The cinematographer on this film, Russell Meddy, complained to producers that Kubrick was taking over his job. And Kubrick's response was to pull him aside and tell him to just sit there and do nothing. Meddy complied and ironically was awarded the Academy Award for cinematography.
I love it.
So he basically let Stanley Kubrick do what Stanley Kubrick always wanted to do, which was have total creative control over every aspect of the visuals of the piece, every aspect of the narrative. And some people were rankled by that, but he just steamrolled over them and made his picture.
Well, let's take a look at the trailer for Spartacus, shall we?
Been destroyed by Spartacus.
Spartacus, a motion picture unequaled in the entire history of filmmaking, unlikely ever to be surpassed in the tenderness and beauty of its love story. Nothing was spared to make Spartacus the superb achievement it is, neither time, nor money, nor talent. For in Spartacus, you will see the finest cast ever assembled relive history's most exciting and inspiring drama. Starring Kirk Douglas as Spartacus, slave, gladiator, invincible fighter. Laurence Olivier as Crassus, symbol of Rome's majesty and might.
I'm not after glory. I'm after Spartacus.
Gene Simmons as the slave Erinia, whose body was bought and sold, but whose love enveloped Spartacus with a radiance few men have known. Charles Lawton as Gracchus, the leader of the Roman Senate. Peter Ustinov as Batiatus, shrewd and devious dealer in human flesh. John Gavin as Julius Caesar, ambitious staff officer. And Tony Curtis as Antoninus, who loved Spartacus like a brother. In the powerful story of the gladiator rebel who sprang from slavery to challenge the awesome might of imperial Rome.
The symbol of the Senate. All the power of Rome.
Damn.
I imagine a God for slaves. And I pray.
What do you pray for?
I pray for a son who'll be born free.
70 millimeter.
70 millimeter.
I mean, the scope and scale of this film is just crazy. I mean, and they even brag about it. That's not something a studio would do now. They wouldn't be like Avengers, like a $400 million budget.
We spent so much fucking money on this.
Guys,
you
look,
wouldn't
we
even
spent
believe.
a lot.
We got all these actors. We got all this shit together.
So it was during the filming of this movie that Stanley Kubrick became fed up with the bullshit of working in Hollywood. Here's just some of the things that he had to contend with on the set. Kirk Douglas stopped production entirely on the film for 10 days when he came down with the flu. Tony Curtis, Antoninus, had to be worked around for 5 weeks after he split his Achilles tendon while he was playing tennis with Douglas at Douglas's home during the shooting. Art director Eric Orbram had a fatal heart attack during production. He would later win a posthumous Oscar for the best art direction in the movie. So I guess that's, he can't control over that. But
he died.
There were just tons of stories about him having to deal with the temperamental actors, him bitching about the budget and having to make concessions on the budget here and there and everywhere. And he just, I guess, became fed up. He was supposed to direct another movie. He was supposed to direct Marlon Brando in One-Eyed Jacks, but negotiations broke down. And I think that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, honestly. He decided he was done and moved to the United Kingdom, where he lived for the rest of his life and made all the rest of it. Every movie from here on out was made in the UK. So he just kind of walked away from the Hollywood establishment and decided at this point that Spartacus had made him a big enough name that he could go out on his own and make his own films. His first film in the UK was Lolita in 1962. I guess we could watch the opening to that, or the trailer for that if you want.
Sure thing.
Lolita.
How did they ever make a movie of Lolita?
How did they ever?
A movie of...
How did they ever?
How did they make a movie of Lolita?
So Stanley Kubrick just loves the core controversy, dude.
The common response, by the way, to that tagline of how did they ever make a movie of Lolita was they didn't.
Yeah. And
this movie, unfortunately, plays it very safe with the material, which is understandable. It's obviously controversial, but why adapt it then?
I think Stanley Kubrick wanted to develop this picture of himself as somebody who covered the topics that other people wouldn't. And earlier in his career especially, he had to acquiesce to censorship boards, and you really don't catch Stanley saying bad things about his own work. He's a great advocate for his own work. And Lolita was one of the only films that I could find Stanley quoted as saying something kind of negative about it. And so I thought I'd read that. His one regret in filming Lolita, talking about the lead actress here, she was actually just the right age. Lolita was 12 and a half in the book. Sue Leon was 13. I think some people had a mental picture of a 9-year-old. I would fault myself in one area of the film, however, because all of the pressure over production code and the Catholic Legion of Decency at the time, I believe I didn't sufficiently dramatize the erotic aspect of Humbert's relationship with Lolita. And because his sexual obsession was only barely hinted at, many people guessed too quickly that Humbert was in love with Lolita, whereas in the novel this comes as a discovery at the end, when she's no longer a nymphette but a dowdy, pregnant suburban housewife. And it's this encounter and his sudden realization of his love that is one of the most poignant elements of that story. If I could do the film over again, I would have stressed the erotic component of their relationship with the same weight Nabokov did. But that's the only major area where I feel the film is susceptible to valid criticism.
Yeah.
What's interesting
You'll
is
see,
that
even in shitting on his own work,
He's like, but it's still a masterpiece, and I'm still great.
outside of the fact that I had to compromise my vision to satiate a bunch of stupid censors, it was perfect.
For the sake of this film being able to even be shown today, it's probably a good thing that he played it safe in that regard.
Well, his only regret is that he had to like you said, had to compromise his vision. So it's really not even he's being super critical of the film. It's saying that, look, my vision was compromised. The reason I couldn't make this film was because of other people.
Because but eroticizing a 13-year-old, which this trailer clearly does,
yes,
is more controversial now than it even was in 1962.
But you see the strategy there that Kubrick employed. I mean, he definitely realized, like, look, if I'm making edgier content, I need to sell it, and that's about as edgy as you can get is what he's doing.
Right, and he's just basically like, how did I even get away with this?
Right,
you got to come see and figure.
So I mean, people can criticize that, but those are the decisions people had to make to even push the boundaries at all.
But you see, Paths of Glory was a similar project, and they sold it a similar way in the trailer. How did they make a movie of this?
Yeah, like how is it even possible?
You can bet your ass that Stanley Kubrick was behind that hype.
What's a way of addressing that?
Courted that kind of
controversy
and vision of himself as the filmmaker that was willing to go where others dared not tread. Even though these movies all did well and are well remembered, obviously, Spartacus once again being one of the biggest movies ever made at that time. Lolita, of course, causing another firestorm of controversy. It wasn't until his next film that he achieved legendary status as a director and really the freedom to do whatever he wanted. And that next film, of course, was Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying.
Attack!
Russia.
Oh.
Base. 10 females to each male.
A Coca-Cola machine.
Fluids.
That's pretty crazy.
It's not over.
The Doomsday Machine.
Blast off!
Where's my shorts?
Where's the bathroom?
Buck, should I get it?
On the hotline.
Dr. Strangelove.
Or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and
Love the bomb. A moving picture.
I first became aware of it, Mandrake, during the physical act of love.
So, this movie was a gigantic risk. It was released in 1964 when nuclear bombs were not exactly a comedic thing.
Right.
And it wasn't even written originally as a comedy.
Unlike now where they're hilarious.
Yeah. He originally conceived the movie as a drama, but according to him, found the ideas that he came up with so ridiculous and comical that he just had to make it a comedy film. And that proved to be the brilliant move in his career.
I don't think he ever made any other movies that could be considered comedies.
No. I mean,
I guess Lolita had some comedy.
Lolita is kind of comedic. It could be argued as a kind of romantic comedy. This film, obviously, and I've heard Clockwork Orange described as a dark comedy.
That's true. There is some comedic elements there.
So he definitely used it as a device, but in this, it was the perfect balm for the sore asses of people that were looking for something to be offended by. People loved the inversion of this horrible thing that they'd all been so worried about and have it turned into just a bunch of lunkheads.
It's kind of cathartic, too, after being pumped so full of fear to just see it as something that's actually ridiculous.
It was a huge move for his career. Absolutely catapulted him and made him a director, like we mentioned earlier, that people would go and see just because it was him that made the film.
Right. So this is kind of when he started to become a star.
Just
in his
kind of
own
a dark surreal fucking take on the just kind of that almost 1950s, 60s culture of just fear about the annihilation of humanity at any moment.
And cover.
The end of civilization. And it's just kind of interesting. And like, you even saw this kind of influenced some of those other Mel Brooks movies where it's kind of like, I don't know, it has that self-awareness, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I can definitely see sort of a Mel Brooks kind of tone in that.
It's it's incredibly self-aware. It's incredibly cool to watch. It's funny to this day. It's incisive in its commentary on military operations and how it's all just like a monkey fucking a coconut, basically.
Right. And like I said, lot of military critiques in Kubrick's work.
Oh, yeah.
And this, he kind of cut the cords for him. And his passion project that he released next in 1968 was
one of the most influential films of all time.
Yep. His collaboration with sci-fi author Arthur C. Clarke on 2001: A Space Odyssey. We could do a whole show on this movie.
Yeah.
It is densely packed with things that changed the way that movies are made. I mean, sci-fi films were never the same after this.
No.
And movies were never the same after this.
I mean, like, you couldn't have Star Wars without 2001: A Space Odyssey.
And it's really this movie, in my opinion, where Stanley Kubrick's ultimate brilliance first shines at its brightest. I don't think it's the only time in his career that it did that, but I really think that here he was allowed total creative freedom. He was allowed to bring in all of the best special effects artists of the day and push the medium to something that looked amazing still. He was able to work with NASA to design these futuristic spacesuits based on what they perceived they were going to have, at the time. He pushed every boundary in filmmaking with this film.
Yes.
Oh, dude,
visually, artistically, cinematographically.
The first time I saw this movie, I watched it all the way through and I was kind of like, huh? But in addition to that, I was like, when was this movie made? And I saw this movie was made in 1969. I'm like, what?
It's mind-blowing.
68.
Or 68, excuse me. Yeah,
68.
1968. Like, I found that. I'm like, are you fucking... Like, I thought this movie was made like 10 years ago at this point.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about Stanley Kubrick back then. I was like 12 or 13 years old. I was like, what?
The special effects for this film, for being from 1968, hold up tremendously well to this day, especially if you can catch it in theaters, which me and Scotty were lucky enough to do. We saw the... I believe in a 70 millimeter as well.
Yeah, 70 millimeter at the
We saw a 70 millimeter
I bet that was
version
beautiful.
of 2001: A Space Odyssey at the Aero Theater in
They'd always
Santa
try to talk about
Monica.
the movie for a minute for these big movies, and they always say like, "This is one of the movies that sells like this and Lawrence of Arabia sell out so quick if it's in 70 millimeter."
Both
anywhere."
like huge genre-defining pictures.
And this is a crazy movie. Let's take a look at the trailer for it.
Yeah, one of my favorite all-time movies.
Welcome to voice print identification. When you see the red light go on, would you please state in the following order your destination, your nationality, and your full name?
Moon, American, Floyd, Haywood R.
Thank you. You are cleared through voice print identification.
Thank you.
Quite frankly, we have had some very reliable intelligence reports that quite a serious epidemic has broken out into Clavis.
I know there have been some conflicting views held by some of you regarding the need for complete security.
Something apparently of an unknown origin.
However, I accept the need for absolute secrecy in this.
This is in fact what has happened.
I'm really not at liberty to discuss this.
We thought it might be the upper part of some buried structure, so we excavated out on all sides, but unfortunately we didn't find anything else.
It hasn't been covered up by natural erosion or other forces. It seems to have been deliberately buried.
4-million-year-old black monolith has remained completely inert, except for a single, very powerful radio emission.
3 weeks ago, the American spacecraft Discovery 1 left on its half-billion-mile voyage to Jupiter.
The sixth member of the Discovery crew was the HAL 9000 computer.
Everything is going extremely well.
One gets the sense that he is capable of emotional responses.
Well, hell, I'm dead. I don't know. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information.
Look, Dave, I can't put my finger on it, but I sense something strange about it.
Just a moment. Just a moment.
Do you know what happened?
I'm sorry, Dave. I don't have enough information.
Made radio contact with him yet?
The radio is still dead.
Hello, Hal, do you read me? Hello, Hal, do you read me? Do you read me, Hal? Do you read me, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
This conversation can serve no purpose anymore.
In Cinerama.
I feel stupid even pointing it out, but we didn't quite get that level of technology in 2001. You know?
We didn't.
Unfortunately, think that we
fell short of Kubrick's
We kind of
vision.
overestimated where we'd be by that point. Because here it is, 2019, 18 years after this movie was supposed to take place, and still don't even really seem close to that. So, goddamn. How unfortunate is that?
That's a shame, but it certainly like defined the futurist vision of film. So many fucking sci-fi movies just acquiesced to looking exactly like
I
this
mean,
movie
so
does.
much of the sci-fi films that were produced before this were just like cheeseball films of like robots going like danger, danger, you know?
I mean, it's really the first film that it kind of gives you like, look how far humanity's come. And I mean, it gives you an overarching vision of like, maybe there is an external force in the universe that's controlling that. I mean, it has some interesting ideas. There's a lot of the imagery in the movie is superb. I mean, especially considering it was made in 1968. The last 20 minutes of that film
are a total mind
are
fuck.
a total mind fuck, especially if you're high. But I like the terror of the chip too. I like the fact that you have this almost benevolent dictator where it's like, this is too important for you humans to fuck this up. Sorry.
Yep. Those last 20 minutes where the aliens are encountered, he consulted heavily with Carl Sagan on that, who explained to him that any extraterrestrial that would have evolved independent of us would probably look nothing like us, and so that anything he would come up with would have an element of falseness to it. And so he suggested that he vaguely represent the aliens rather than actually showing them. One of the more controversial parts of the movie, the last 20 minutes, a lot of people claim they can't get into the movie because of that.
Arthur C.
Strange
Clarke
and-
famously was once held up at the airport by someone who's like, I'm only going to clear you through security if you explain to me the ending of this movie, because I don't get it, basically.
Right.
So that's a pretty cool little anecdote. But, despite Kubrick being thought of as a control freak, obviously a very successful collaborator in films like this, not afraid to defer to the expertise of others, not afraid to work with another creative mind like Arthur C. Clarke.
When his vision would be compromised by a lack of knowledge on his part, he was never afraid to hire the best people in the field to fill in that fucking position. He hired several former NASA employees to work on this film. He was obsessed with it being as photorealistic as possible. He wanted it to be indistinguishable from reality. And he made sure that he got as close to that as a filmmaker can, which is why this movie is still puzzled over and looked at and talked about to this day, and still a huge influence on the genre, both on the genre and just on filmmaking in general.
I mean, even in other respects of the cultural impact that they have, that people think about this is a possibility of a future, like people talking to each other on screens. That's not really a common idea, especially for that time period. It's like, I'm going to have a conversation with someone that I'm not actually, that we're going to be face to face in a sense, but not truly. I mean, there was so many ideas. I mean, at the time, America was thinking about space travel. Like, this seemed like at that time we were on the cusp of this being a reality. In 2001, this could, in some potential universe, be the future.
He was super secretive about the filming of this movie. He had all the props destroyed after he was done with them to make sure that nobody else ever was able to use them or see how they were made. I found a really weird story that I followed up on that I couldn't find any more information about than what I'm going to give you right here.
Okay.
There are 19 minutes of this film that were cut. And everybody thought that along with the props and all the production footage and stuff from the film, Stanley destroyed it. But in 2010, the complete extra 19 minutes that was thought lost was preserved in a salt mine in Kansas. Special effects supervisor Trumbull hopes to feature never-before-seen images from the once-lost footage in an upcoming behind-the-scenes photo book. That's all I could find about this. So somebody found the 19 missing minutes of 2001: A Space Odyssey in a salt mine in Kansas.
Dude, I hope they fucking release it at some point.
What a strange...
I don't know if that's true, but...
If it is, put it
there
out
you
to
go.
the world, dude.
I think that this film probably better than any other kind of showcases that quote you were talking about earlier from Stanley Kubrick of, if you can imagine it, you can film it.
Right. If it can be seen or imagined, it can be filmed. That's absolutely true. And I think
and you see watching that trailer, you don't look at the special effects and be like, oh, wow, terrible 1968 special effects. It's like that holds up. Holds up better than a lot of shit from like 1998, you know?
Yeah, look at Anaconda, dude. Does that hold up? Fuck no. This movie does.
This movie was not as controversial as his previous entries, but it did court some controversy that I read about from religious people who thought its portrayal of an ultimately godless universe or a universe overseen by powerful alien beings where time is meaningless.
Well, boo fucking who.
But there was very little. This is a universally acclaimed and loved film.
Yeah.
And
you're pretty much looking for something to be pissed about.
I think that after this movie, after getting all of this love and all of this recognition from everybody, all of his peers, Kubrick was ready to piss everybody off again. And so in 1971, he made A Clockwork Orange, which is probably my favorite Kubrick film. I always vacillate between this and Full Metal Jacket, but it's hard to make an argument against this movie in my eyes.
Yeah,
it is
super controversial, super brutal, super unflinching.
Bit of pain in the Gulliver, TJ.
Just a totally uncompromising film vision, and really, really honestly faithful to the Anthony Burgess novel it's based on, which I happened to read before I ever saw this film.
Oh, really?
So I went into this movie with that book in my mind and was just, I remember being blown away.
Probably thinking, like, there's no way this movie is going to...
I thought, how did they ever? They must have dumbed it down. They must.
How did they ever make a movie of Clockwork Orange?
Right. So it's another one of those. And actually, I think that Kubrick was not initially interested in doing A Clockwork Orange. He allegedly didn't like the book the first time he read it.
He's like, eh.
He didn't really get the language that Burgess uses.
It's tough.
It really is.
It's a hard book. I have a copy sitting there on my shelf. I've tried a couple times, and it's just like, it's just, I can't understand what the fuck you're saying, dude.
You need the Spark Notes version, dude.
Right.
Yeah, I do.
Apparently, upon later consideration, though, he started to see Alex DeLarge as a Richard III style anti-hero and became very interested in making the film again. He chose to fast motion blur a sex scene in the film between Alex and two women. The scene ended up contributing to the film's eventual X rating, not for explicit content, but because the censors feared the technique would be copied by actual pornographers who could speed up their films as a loophole to get their films passed by the ratings board.
Dude, I remember that's one of the scenes I remember in the film because it's just like it's kind of jarring, it's out of nowhere, but it's really fun. It's a really fun way to handle like this guy hooking up with these two chicks.
Do you know how long that scene was in actual time?
I have no idea.
28 minutes of unbroken fucking. How do you like that?
But you know another thing we haven't really talked enough about is the use of like classical music in Kubrick films, and I believe he does it even. A lot. He does a lot in this movie, but I mean, there's always like an element of music in his films, like the singing in the rain scene in this film.
Well, that was actually improvised by Malcolm McDowell. Yes, that was.
But Kubrick chose to leave that take of obviously in the film.
If there's a hero of this film in the mind of Kubrick, it's Malcolm McDowell. He absolutely insisted that he played the role. Was not interested in even looking at other people. And was a huge confidant of Malcolm McDowell's, allowed him wide range in creating the character of Alex DeLarge. Yes, that entire scene of Singing in the Rain was improvised and added into the film later because Stanley thought it was such a fantastic idea.
That was a really good collaboration.
And this film was blamed for a rash of violence, right?
Yes, there was a bunch of hand-wringing and handkerchief dousing with tears over this film. Just like any other piece of art that challenges the namby-pamby white picket fence status quo, it's blamed for actual outbreaks of violence and gang activity and all of this shit in the UK. It was
funny. Wasn't the novel
alleged...
actually a commentary on that, though, itself?
Yeah, for a series of alleged copycat break-ins and killings in the UK that happened around the time this was released. Some other dude would break into a house and rape a woman, and he must have done that because he saw Alex do it on A Clockwork Orange.
Yeah, because humans never did that kind of thing.
Yeah, the
before.
same criticism we hear in contemporary times about, Grand Theft Auto or some shit.
Stanley himself received threats, and this movie really pushed him to be more of a recluse. He didn't start receiving actual credible threats until his next film, which is interesting because it's a way less controversial film in my opinion. But should we watch? Let's watch a little bit of the trailer of this. Maybe this is where we kind of have to be careful because they're going to be using music and shit.
So the Clockwork Orange trailer.
Well, after this. But I don't know. Well, let's try it, and we can mute it if you think it's going to be a problem.
Let's take a look real quick here.
I just get worried when we get into this era.
Let's see. Yep.
I love how he preempts all of the critical commentary in the trailers to his films.
Yeah, he's like, I'm gonna
witty, sardonic,
I'm going to tell you
metaphorical,
what to think about this film.
violent, gritty, passionate.
Yeah,
comics.
He's putting out his own adjectives about it. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to review the film for you in the trailer. I see what you mean about there being a certain uniformity to the trailers of these films, though. It does kind of seem like there's a lot of trailers that employ this like sort of stark black background with white words superimposed, and just trying to get you to formulate an opinion about what you're going to see before you've even seen which is what a good trailer should do.
A lot of his trailers always kind of, I think, try to leave you slightly uncomfortable. He really wants to do something like
but titillated and interested.
Yeah, like the flashing lights, like flashing purple and fucking, and they intersplice these random vignette shots of the characters in these various poses.
Another sad fact about censorship comes in his next movie, Barry Lyndon, which I hadn't watched in its totality until very recently. I saw it about 2 or 3 months ago.
I've never seen it.
TJ, you've never seen it. I think it really is a shame. It is an absolutely beautiful film. And another boundary-pushing cinematic film that we'll talk about. I had you pull this picture because Stanley was committed to realism as he was in 2001: A Space Odyssey with Barry Lyndon. And in movies before this, if there was a candlelit scene, they would light a real candle and allow that natural light to cast on the actors, but off camera somewhere, there would be,
lighting.
A light with an orange gel on it. Stanley wanted to film in candlelight, and at the time, there really wasn't a whole lot of technology that would allow people to do that.
Right, and it's to this day. I mean, you can't. If you do any sort of video production shit, light is so important.
Well, let's say you see a scene of Star Trek and they're in a cave. It's still gonna be a brightly lit cave. The low light, shooting in low light is very difficult. It's extremely difficult because that's what a camera captures is the light. It's essentially what the device it does. So it's more or less light that it lets in. But like you're saying, even the best technology at the time, this shot is almost shouldn't even exist.
Right. While on the set of this film, he started to receive death threats. And the reason was because this film takes place in partly in Ireland and shows military activity taking place in Ireland, and this hair-lipped the IRA. And they started threatening to...
Pretty serious threats. I mean, the IRA were,
right.
They were actually carrying out attacks.
And he lived in the United
Kingdom,
Kingdom, so he's right next. That's not an idle threat. They can get to him if they really want to.
And they said that they were going to break into Stanley's house and kill his family like Alex and his Droogs did in his previous film. Stanley was distraught by this and actually censored himself. Asked the studio not to show this film until after his death in 1999. And it wasn't. This film was not publicly shown in the British Isles until that time because he was so afraid that the IRA was going to kill his family. So that's kind of a sad footnote in the history of the censorship of Stanley Kubrick, was that eventually he was pushed to censor himself with threats of actual violence. Other than that, I guess we could watch the trailer for this movie.
And by the way, Stanley Kubrick, starting to look like Stanley Kubrick by this point.
Yeah, this is the Kubrick that most people know and love. And by the time that he did this film, his demands on actors and production crew had become legend in the film industry. He was just an uncompromising, uncaring, hard-hearted driving force behind these films. And he required everybody to push themselves beyond their limits.
Barry Lyndon, a film by Stanley Kubrick, starring Ryan O'Neal and Marissa Berenson, has won the Best Picture and Best Director award presented by the National Board of Review. Richard Schickel, in a Time magazine 7-page cover story, called the film ravishing, overwhelming, an uncompromised artistic vision, and said, director Stanley Kubrick asserts a claim to greatness that time alone can and probably will confirm. CBS TV critic Pat Collins
Well, it did.
called it
So.
a masterpiece, monumental, a perfect film of epic size. Playboy magazine's Bruce Williamson, a film classic. Rex Reed of the New York Daily News wrote, as an 18th century rake's progress, Barry Lyndon catalogs the rise and fall of a likable scoundrel, liar, cheat, and social climber, transporting the viewer into a world of long ago and creating the kind of magic few movies accomplish and few directors attempt in a lifetime. It is a magnificent entertainment, sumptuous, lush.
Thought he was going to grab her
gorgeous,
tit
and
for a second.
a classic
I think that was
of inestimable
purposeful.
value.
Little Lord Bullington.
Lord Bullington.
Liz Smith of Cosmopolitan called it a perfect movie. Beautiful, breathtaking, brilliant.
This is not a good trailer.
It isn't.
No.
It portrays the film as mostly a military movie, and that might be why you have avoided it so long. There are some military battle scenes in it, but it is much more the... I really think this trailer should focus on what the movie is about, which is Barry Lyndon. This crazy, roguish character that moves around the film by guile and social climbability, and he's just a crazy fuck up.
Yeah, I'm not impressed with. Some narrator reading me reviews. The New York Times says
the trailer
and
does not represent the film well at all.
Says, and
It's basically it's just showing you scenes from the film. It's not a very good trailer. I mean,
No, it
I know all trailers do that, but there's no narrative being demonstrated. It's not really giving you the message of what this film is about.
yeah, like you watch the trailer for 2001, you watch a trailer for fucking Doctor Strangelove or
This is a
Clockwork
story
Orange
about a
or
man
Lolita.
seeking his-
It's all in your face.
It's about a very ambitious man from very little that comes from very little, but has a lot of pride, and it's kind of his seeking his fortune. in the world.
If you like rise and fall movies, like
Yeah.
Rise to Power and Fall from Grace movies, this is one of the best I've ever seen.
It is. It's an underrated,
a fantastic movie.
Kubrick classic, and the fact that it doesn't get the attention it deserves is honestly a shame.
In order to film the candlelight scenes, he pretty obsessively researched how to get that low light to transfer onto film in a meaningful way. He ended up purchasing some Zeiss lenses that are only now starting to become available for rent to people. He purchased them when they were first invented. They were being used by NASA for, shooting in orbit and shit, shooting the low light out in space. And he used those lenses, had to modify one of his own cameras, basically cut parts out of it to fit the lens. But he made it work.
So when he made this movie, he was fucking determined to make shooting by candlelight a thing.
Go and watch the indoor scenes in that film. I recommend you watch the film, TJ. But even if you don't, I mean, you don't really see that in film. You don't see that when they do an indoor scene that's only lit by candle. It's like Paul said, it's always obviously it's the room is lit externally.
Because
obviously modern lights lighting.
Most filmmakers would just say
it doesn't matter.
Yeah, who gives a shit?
Right. As long as it looks that way.
But the atmosphere in this movie is perfect.
Yeah, it
because
is.
of that. As a
it's
result.
carefully. He wanted that room to look like it would have looked if you were there. See, candlelit rooms like that are plenty of light for the human eye to see. Not for a camera, though.
Right.
And he wanted that room to look exactly how it would have looked if it were lit by candles, as it would have been during the time of this filming.
Because he wants you to be completely immersed in the time and the place.
I mean, this movie is got beautiful costuming in it. I mean, everything is absolutely period in it. You're not going to find an element of it that's wrong. And
but it certainly doesn't have the reputation of Clockwork Orange, or 2001, or Doctor Strangelove.
And a lot of that, I think, had to do with his self-censorship of the film. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a standout in his movies. It's kind of sandwiched between some
Clockwork Orange and The Shining. So
right. Some actually controversial films and some actually, and it's just kind of a quiet movie in his repertoire, but I think it's easily one of his best. He was offered after this film a few chances at making a horror movie. He was offered the directorial spot for The Exorcist 2. I think he kind of wisely turned that down and decided that he was going to make his own horror movie in The Shining.
Great photo here.
I love this picture, man. It's so awesome to see him standing there at that set with that iconic shot, Rumors circulated during the production of this film of his crazy demands made upon actors and crew. We talked about this, I think, during our favorite horror movies thing, but I thought it bared mentioning again here that Stephen King was pretty salty about this adaptation of the novel.
Because Kubrick basically took the premise of the Stephen King book and then did his own thing with it. He did not. It was not really an adaptation of The Shining as much as it was, I'm going to use the setup of The Shining to do something that's completely different. I've never read The Shining, so I don't know what Stephen King's vision really was or if it would have also made a good movie, but I do know that Stephen King did eventually try to make his own version for television.
I think Kubrick just probably viewed that as like
just awful.
He probably viewed that as like in this project, especially because like he's not like collaborating with someone. He's not. It wasn't like him and Stephen King set out to make this film. It's like Stanley Kubrick probably had his own vision for it. And I don't think I'm not even sure, but I heard this. But I've heard they didn't even actually read the novel. He was kind of like he skimmed through it, like, okay, I'm making the Stanley Kubrick version.
It's kind of like who genuinely knows if he did or he didn't.
Yeah,
and I got to be honest here. I think Stephen King gets a bum rap in this because the artistic vision of Stanley Kubrick for the film adaptation of this was so superior to his. His work kind of got trampled on. I can see his perspective on this. Think of how Stanley would have felt if Stephen King had decided he was going to write a book about one of Stanley Kubrick, like 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
The book. You know what I mean? And then he changed all the principal characters around and changed the principal scenes in the film to fit his... He would have felt the same, I think, similarly to Stephen King. And this is two huge powerhouse artistic visions colliding.
Yes. And I mean, both legendary names. Obviously, Stephen King has had a lot more misfires than Kubrick, but at the same time, Stephen King is... he's stepped up to the plate quite a few more times than Kubrick ever did as well.
Absolutely. Let's watch the trailer for this.
It's a fucking masterpiece. I love this
I don't
movie.
suppose they told you anything in Denver about the tragedy we had up here during the winter of 1970? I hired a man named Charles Grady as the winter caretaker. From what I've been told, I mean, he seemed like a completely normal individual. But at some point during the winter, he must have suffered some kind of a complete mental breakdown. He ran amok and killed his family with an axe.
Well, you can rest assured, Mr. Ullman, that's not going to happen with me.
That's right.
Brilliant trailer.
It is.
Do you really want to go and live in that hotel for the winter?
Sure I do. It'll be lots of fun.
The only thing that can get a bit trying up here during the winter is the tremendous sense of...
I also like how it's not trying to like just do this big twist on you. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's selling it what it is out in the open, but it's still making it interesting. It's so skillfully edited, and the
In stark
narrative is so
contrast to that
powerful.
previous trailer, which was
Yeah.
just random scenes from the film with critical acclaim
Well,
over it.
with that, there's almost no narrative. It's like this film is good. That's basically what this one. This one's like already in your mind, starting to form like what this movie is about and what you can expect.
Yeah. It's, I think, much better at conveying the tone and feel of the film than many of his previous trailers were.
One of the most rewatchable movies ever made.
Oh,
in my
man,
opinion.
yeah. This
I mean,
movie-
I've seen this movie like 20, 30 times. At
It's
least.
just laden. I mean, it's legendary for how laden it is with subtext and strange little things in the shot that are, could be meaningless but could have deep meaning. Every time I watch this movie, and I've probably watched it dozens of times now, I see something I've never seen before. It's one of those types of films. I notice a little detail that I never looked at before. And yeah, it's just brilliant. I mean, I was afraid that this biography talking about his films was just going to
brilliant.
He's brilliant.
It's
He's
brilliant.
brilliant. He's brilliant. He's
Yeah.
brilliant.
Well, he is. I mean, what are you going to say? It's fucking Stanley Kubrick.
The Shining is one of those movies too that you get on this like YouTube rabbit hole. You'll be like, I want to hear what other people think about this film. So you
There's
just-
so much speculation,
I know.
so much fan theories, so much bullshit.
I mean, we covered it in our
We've talked,
conspiracy episode a little
Room
bit.
237.
But
and
because
stuff,
it's because it's such a preeminently interpretable film with no clear interpretation. There's so many different ways it could be taken, but there's no clear way that it was meant to be taken.
So I mean, yeah, with all due respect to Stephen King, I mean, that's why he gets the bum rap he does, because if you think about the novel versus the movie, everyone remembers the movie.
I like to ask people that have seen this movie, do you have a personal theory for what the subtext is, why we see him in the photo at the end of the film? Like,
my thoughts on why I think to me, it's kind of just about like the propensity of violence within human beings and just saying like, maybe you think you've escaped that primal darkness within you, but you really haven't.
Yeah.
Like when he's at the photo at the end, it's like, you've always been the caretaker here, as in, this guy who went crazy and ran amok that you think you're so separate from, you're not. That can just as easily be you. But I mean, like, that's just one very basic interpretation out of so fucking
there's people
many
that interpret the
people
movie-
who think it's about the genocide of the Native
genocide of the
Americans
Americans.
or the fucking the moon landing conspiracy, or there's just a billion fucking things you
I
could
think
bring
this
into the
movie-
fucking film. The Minotaur,
Yeah. I think this movie, more than many of his other films, is a sponge for what people want to see. It absorbs all your own personal shit. You know what I see when I watch
like
this
the
movie?
Overlook Hotel too.
For me, this movie's about alcoholism. Because
Yeah.
I grew up in an alcoholic household.
I've heard that one too. Yeah.
And I watch this movie as an examination of the hell of living with an alcoholic. Him being in the photo at the end of it, holding up a drink, is symbolic of the fact that alcohol has caused this kind of violence against one's own family throughout the generations. It's always a tragedy. That's what I see in the movie.
Yeah, I can
because
definitely
that's my
see it.
personal bias in going in. If a movie's going to ask me to fill it up with myself, and it's going to be an examination of a parent and a child and a wife, and there's heavy drinking involved, I'm going to project that.
Maybe
onto a film.
maybe it's kind of the point of the film, because like the Overlook Hotel, I think that's what it's called, right?
It's almost like, to me,
it kind of shows you though. I mean, it kind of whoever's in it, it plays to them. And I think that it's the same way the audience has that relationship with the movie, where whatever you want to see in it, you see in it.
But you have to remember too, like when you get towards the end of the film, you start seeing more and more things happen in the hotel, and there's more and more kind of characters and little vignettes and moments. And I think to me, it's almost like it absorbs the memories of what's happened there. And when you absorb that, it shows you, it gives you all these different looks of like what happened there and what's occurred, and just like it's almost like a cyclical nature of humanity. Like every generation, we're different, we're so much different, but humans really
the old nothing is ever over type of.
Well, it's like we're essentially the same as we were 50,000 years ago from evolutionary perspective. Obviously, there's been changes in some incremental amount of time like that. We obviously know it takes a long time, Where it's like we're just trapped in that nature. That's kind of what I've always viewed it as.
Sure. I could see that. I mean, I can see a lot of the theories that people try and paste onto this movie. And I think that that's one of the reasons why it's one of his best remembered films. I mean, certainly the central performance of Jack Nicholson, you can't pass that over. I mean, this was a great collaboration between these two. And one that I kind of wish had, multiple movies behind it. But Stanley was not known for having, the same leading man. He found the actor that he felt was best for the role, and he moved forward. So
yeah, there was none of these sort of long, fruitful collaborations like you see with
I will give you a hint.
Kurosawa and Mifune or Burton and Depp.
And the next,
that one
the
definitely
next director,
went
we're definitely going to
awry.
see that trend. It's not that does not hold true for the next director.
Yeah,
I'll say that.
Kurosawa had guys that he liked to use over and over again. Well, I guess we just revealed what the episode.
Oh, well, you're an idiot.
So,
well, thank you, TJ. Never mind.
Around this time, Kubrick starts to space out his work a whole lot. There's 7 full years before he makes another feature-length film or a film of any kind.
So he's really at this point waiting for something to get excited about, or I guess that he's either just working on the new project.
It's at this time that he had a lot of passion projects that never came to fruition that he was really pushing for. He had a Napoleon biopic that he was really passionate about that never got made. And it was during this period of time between The Shining and Full Metal Jacket that that movie kind of broke down, and just he realized I'm not going to be able to make it. Full Metal Jacket is once again it's vies for the top spot for me in his films, and once again it's like a great big sponge. Yeah. I pulled up this picture. Let's go back to The Shining real quick because I pulled up this picture to show what some people say is a huge diss to Stephen King.
Yeah.
Stephen King's movie or book has Jack Torrance driving a red VW Beetle. In the film, his Beetle is yellow. And at the end of the movie, when the old man is driving up to the Overlook Hotel, we get a brief shot of this very obvious red VW Beetle crushed on the side of the road by a giant truck. A lot of people interpret this as Stanley's fuck you to Stephen King, like this is my vision and here's your vision on the side of the road, bitch. Crushed.
Well, I mean, you'd have to say that history kind of fell that way. I think that if you're talking about The Shining, the iconic version of The Shining that people remember is not the Stephen King book or his attempt at making it into a miniseries later on. It's the Stanley Kubrick vision. So it might be a fuck you to Stephen King, but it's a lingering, lasting, and very effectual fuck you.
I hope the Stanley Kubrick estate.
But it does say at least that Stanley Kubrick read the book, or at least some of it. So
or whoever has the rights to this film. One film I would absolutely fucking hate to see remade is this, and there's a strong trend in horror now to do that. So I hope that never happens.
Well, hopefully nobody's stupid enough.
I don't think any Stanley Kubrick film should be remade.
Yeah, neither do I.
I don't think so either.
I don't think you should.
I'm in agreement with you.
I don't think you should remake Doctor Strangelove. I don't think you should remake 2001.
That's why I'm saying I just hope that never happens.
Orange,
I don't know who has the rights to it, but please let that never happen.
No one should ever do that. It just shouldn't be done. It's just a bad fucking idea. You're not gonna fucking do it better than Stanley Kubrick did it, so don't fucking do it.
So 7 years after The Shining, Stanley returned to a well-worn trope in his movies, war. Once again, this time the Vietnam War.
Yeah, I don't have
Full
a
Metal
picture
Jacket.
for this, so
yeah, that's fine.
I'm just gonna. Should I just let me just start the trailer and maybe just freeze it so we can have a picture overlaying this. So let's take a little look at some of this trailer.
I'm your.
Jesus. That is a loud
It's a
trailer.
loudin'.
It's a loudin'. All right, so yeah, this should be good. Go ahead.
So, a lot of people remember this movie mostly for its first act, which takes place in basic training, where we meet all the kind of principal characters.
Another one I haven't seen, by the way. So
yeah, I don't know how you've gone so long and not seen this film. I know you have a distaste for war movies, but come on, TJ.
It's Stanley Kubrick, dude.
This is a Kubrick film.
Gomer Pyle, TJ, come on, dude.
And there's so many referential things that you're just not gonna get, TJ. You're not gonna get because you haven't seen this movie.
I haven't seen Beverly Hills Chihuahua 2 either. And obviously that's
definitely on the same
point. Just as
cultural
influential.
influence. Yeah.
Hey, have you honestly watched Beverly Hills Chihuahua 2? The cinematography is incredible.
Oh, I bet
so
it is.
I hear.
I bet it is. So it's a Vietnam War story. Another movie that invites you, I think, to pour your own feelings on that conflict and conflict in general onto it. The thing that connects me to this movie so strongly is Matthew Modine's character of Joker. Especially in these early films in the movie, looks exactly like my dad did when he was in the Army. All of his Army photos, he looks remarkably like Private Joker. There's a lot of interesting little tidbits I pulled about this movie, knowing TJ hadn't seen it. I guess Schwarzenegger was supposed to play a major role in the movie. Animal Mother.
Now, I would have seen it if Schwarzenegger was in it.
Yep. Adam Baldwin ended up doing that role. Bruce Willis was offered a part in the movie before he was to start shooting the first 6 episodes of Moonlighting, so he had to say no. Denzel Washington wanted in, but didn't like that Kubrick didn't send out a script beforehand to audition. So a lot of people kind of tapped this movie as a possibility for being in it, but no real big names ended up in this movie. Matthew Modine was not a big name at this time. Really, none of the people in this film were. England was the adopted home for Kubrick at this time, who claimed to have a fear of flying. A British territorial army base doubled as a Marine boot camp. So he shot this very American film entirely in Britain. To create the necessary jungle-like atmosphere of Vietnam, 200 palm trees were imported from Spain and plastic plants were shipped in from Hong Kong. Belgian Army colonel was such a big fan of Kubrick's that he lent him 4 M41 tanks to shoot with.
Whoa.
What? Damn, dude.
Cool.
Yeah.
Man, being Stanley Kubrick had his fucking perks. Can I just have like 4 tanks? Yeah, all right, go ahead and take them.
And, a very probably the most memorable role in this film, R. Lee Ermey's role here as the gunnery sergeant Hartman, to show you how committed Stanley was to his vision. Pretty early on in filming, R. Lee Ermey was in a car accident while not shooting and crushed all the ribs on the left side of his body, was out of commission for 6 months.
Ouch.
And Kubrick shut down filming, refused to move forward and refused to recast the role. So he was very, very committed to this vision. And I can see why. R. Lee Ermey would not have been replaceable in this film. And as like I said, probably one of the most, if not
probably
the most
only
memorable thing about
scenes
it.
I've really seen from this movie are his scenes, because I've just seen them in so many like compilation videos and stuff on YouTube.
To give you an example of the types of pressures he would put on actors and what he asked of them, Matthew Modine's wife was pregnant at the start of the filming of this movie, and when she went to the hospital to give birth, Stanley insisted that he told him, he said, "Look, I've had kids. You're just going to be in the way of the doctors. Just stay here and work." And Modine took out his pocket knife, threatened to cut his hand open in order to get permission to go to the hospital to get it stitched up, and I guess it worked. Kubrick let him go see his son be born.
I thought you were about to say he threatened to stab Kubrick.
No. Threatened to hurt himself bad enough that he'd have to go to the hospital to get stitched up so that he could also go see his son be born.
It's like, all
and
right.
that's the lengths that he had to go to get Kubrick to say, all right, go
It was
see
like,
your child.
Look, I've done this kid shit. You're
Yeah.
just going to be in the way. Just stay here.
Did
Trust
someone
me.
finally checkmated Stanley Kubrick? There you go. It's like, I'll just injure myself and have to go. And he's like, all right, fair enough.
All right, I guess you checkmated me this time. Whatever. He lost, a day's shooting? Who cares?
After this movie,
He didn't do shit.
he didn't do shit for a very long time. And it
Had
was
a bunch of projects in development, but nothing really
Kind of development hell.
nothing really came into fruition for him.
he had a movie named Blue in development and a movie named Rhapsody, which was supposed to be a psychosocial psychosexual like drama film or something.
Right.
He combined both of those 2 projects into his final film, which was Eyes Wide Shut.
Yeah. Eyes Wide Shut. With Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman were both married at this time.
Yep.
So this is one of my least favorite Stanley Kubrick films, and I actually rewatched it for this episode to see if your
distaste
for it had
over
changed.
time.
I feel like I appreciated it a little more than the last time I saw it, which was when it was a new film. But I still feel like it's not going to be a movie that I go back to very often.
Yeah. I saw it once and I kind of feel like, that's enough.
It's kind of an examination of marriage and all of the insecurities that come with marriage and the weirdness of monogamous relationships and the strangeness that it forces upon people.
You know, one thing that really fucked with me with this movie is that I feel like up to this point, everything from from Lolita through Full Metal Jacket, although I haven't seen that, but I can just kind of tell from what I have seen, there was like, whether he was making a comedy or a drama or whatever, there was always sort of a Kubrick sense of humor. And I just feel like this movie doesn't really have much of a sense of humor about itself. And I also feel like maybe his thinking in casting Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman is that they'll have this sort of
chemistry,
natural chemistry, even if they're supposed to have a strained relationship. So maybe they'll have that strained chemistry even, but they just kind of come across like two strangers who are cold to each other, but not in the way that a couple that's been together for a long time are cold, but just kind of like almost like strangers.
I just think this movie misses the point. It's like, what's the point of this film? What is this film trying to say to me? Like, what do I take away from this film? And like, the honest truth is not really much. And
so, I mean, the question is, had Kubrick lost some of his touch by this point?
He was very,
I don't
was he
think
out
so.
of practice? Did it just not, or was it just a film that didn't come to fruition and it just happened to be his last film, so he kind of...
I mean, you have to. I guess I would expect to some degree. There's probably. I mean, he's starting to slip. He's getting older. I mean, obviously had heart disease, other things.
I mean, he died very shortly after the
that's
film
what I'm saying.
was completed.
I mean, I'm not sure what his health was like.
Or I think before the film was even totally.
I mean, is there anything know about it? I mean, I know he's very private. Is there anything know about his health?
It was completely finished by the time he died. Okay.
Yeah, he completely finished Eyes Wide Shut. The first time I watched this movie, I was a young bachelor, never married. The second time I watched this movie, I was on the back end of a failed marriage. And I saw it a different way. I still, like I said, do not rank it among my favorite of his works. In fact, I would say it's one of my least. I don't think that the subject matter is as incisive as other Kubrick films, and I think that's why it's less memorable.
Do you think maybe part of that is because it was an amalgamation of two passion projects instead of being purely one vision?
It could have been that he compromised his vision too much on those two separate films that he had to mishmash them into this.
Yeah.
It could have been that, like I said, the subject matter, it's a smaller film. All of his films are these big bombastic things where they're looking at these big lives. And this is, even though they go through some crazy, weird sexual rituals and stuff, in terms of the characters, they're smaller. And the interplay between them is smaller.
Yeah. And honestly, what really stands out from this movie, because I probably watched it, I don't know how long ago it was. It wasn't like an eternity ago or anything, but it wasn't recently, but I mean, the thing that really has stood the test of time for me is just the scenes in the mansion with the weird sex party and the masks and the rituals.
Right, because those are all shot with Kubrick's traditional, like, just absolutely perfect cinematography.
But the rest of the movie, I remember being pretty dull.
The dialogue is plotting, and a lot of it has to do with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman.
Yeah.
Both of them, when they're in the right vehicle, can be really good. But both of them, when you're in a dialogue-heavy film like this, it just doesn't work, man, for me. Not as much as it works for any of the other leading characters in any of his other films. Maybe with the exception of his early, very first 1950s films.
Right.
The dialogue almost feels like it's a step back towards that.
It almost feels like to get anything of like substance made that, like, obviously you said this is a combination of two passion projects. He probably needed two big actors, and at the time, I mean, Tom Cruise is still actually a pretty big actor.
So
but
you
Nicole
think Tom
Kidman,
Cruise was just a means to an end? Like, I need some kind of name attached to this to get made?
I think so.
I think
Honestly,
he was
I believe
attracted
so.
to the fact that he was married to another very talented and very well-known actress as
I'm
well,
sure that
and that
definitely
he could interplay their actual marital politics into this film.
But
which
Tom Cruise at this
he was
time was
actually legendary for having done.
But Tom Cruise at this time too was on fire. Like, it was like every movie he touched was basically gold.
Yeah. There were some things that I read about the production of this film where Tom Cruise has talked about and Nicole Kidman has talked about that they felt that Stanley was trying to foment real marital difficulty between them at certain times, in bringing up things that were real to them to try and get that emotional impact to be real.
Right.
I don't know whether it was filming this movie that did it or not, but of course Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise did not last as a couple.
And a lot of people believe, I don't know if I necessarily do, but a lot of people believe their marriage was a total Hollywood sham marriage anyway.
Yeah, I would be inclined to believe that
I
as
think
well.
that's probably true. I don't know for sure, of course. How can I? I'm not hanging out at Tom Cruise's house observing him in his natural habitat.
David Miscave and Tom Cruise, like, what's going on,
I did
guys?
fuck Nicole Kidman one time, but she didn't really, she wasn't divulgent of any personal
I'm sure
details
she probably wasn't
of her
coming
life,
back for seconds.
Yeah,
so.
exactly.
I did pull the trailer for
it's
Eyes
kind of
Wide
a one
Shut,
and done with me.
But I think
we probably should.
Yeah,
not.
because I think the trailer is basically Nicole Kidman's tits barely veiled by a very wispy shirt.
Let's not do that one.
So that one's probably not going to be YouTube friendly, unfortunately. But definitely, look, dude, people shit on this movie a lot. I'm not going to be one that shits on it from here on out. I think that if you like Kubrick, you should watch it.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth watching from a completist standpoint. And honestly, after doing this episode, I want to kind of go back and maybe try to complete, because I've seen most of these films. I haven't seen a lot of the early ones, and I haven't seen Full Metal Jacket, and I haven't seen Barry Lyndon, but I've seen pretty much everything else.
Yeah, I mean, we were in similar positions.
I have seen Barry Lyndon.
So I want to go ahead. I'll probably go ahead and try to see some more of these. But
I would recommend it.
But Eyes Wide Shut, I don't think I'll give it a rewatch. I think
Bullshit, you did Kubrick in reverse, dude.
Kubrick in reverse. There you go. Start with Eyes Wide Shut and work your way back.
I'll steal Paul's incomplete concept for, what was it?
Shyamalan in reverse,
yeah. Which you did 2?
I did 3.
Oh, 3. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Then he tapped out.
Give
I'm sorry.
Credit where it's due.
out.
I did 3.
You did 3 of them before you said, I'm done with this.
So right after filming this movie, special effects technology had taken a massive leap.
Right.
And another passion project of Kubrick's that he had backburnered for a long time because he didn't feel visually stuff was there, he started working on in earnest, which was AI. I didn't pull anything for AI because it wasn't Stanley Kubrick that ended up making the film.
It was Spielberg.
A long time, who revealed after he died in 1999 of a heart attack while he was in pre-production work on AI. He died quietly and peacefully in his sleep of a heart attack. And after that happened, Steven Spielberg kind of revealed that he and Stanley had this behind-the-scenes kind of rapport with one another.
Yeah,
they exchanged filmmaking anecdotes and the tricks of the trade and such, and they really respected one another as artists and visionaries. And that Stanley had even said in the past that he felt that Spielberg would be more adept at taking AI as a project because he felt it was more his speed of film.
Yeah.
So I think that Steven Spielberg took that as a go-ahead from Stanley to go ahead and make AI.
Right.
And I don't really like the movie.
The final result to me, I don't hate the film, but it really just reeks to me as a compromise between Kubrick's style and Spielberg's style, and I don't think that they're very well suited to each other.
I don't see Stanley Kubrick in this movie, and I think
I see an attempt to be Stanley
maybe,
Kubrick in this movie.
Maybe, but I see very clearly, very strongly Steven Spielberg in this film.
Yes,
and I really can a director help but that be the case?
No, especially one as iconic as Spielberg. I mean, obviously Spielberg has a very distinctive style of filmmaking. And it's kind of interesting that they had a friendship simply because in a lot of ways, they're both extremely talented filmmakers, but they're on very opposite ends of the spectrum, with Spielberg being about big blockbuster films. I mean, Kubrick did his blockbusters too, obviously, but his blockbusters were very... Spielberg makes popcorn movies.
Right.
He does.
He makes popcorn movies. He makes exquisite, great...
He's not making subversive
well-done
films.
popcorn films. Kubrick is way more subversive than Spielberg.
Oh.
They both have a totally different kind of shooting style. They both approach subject matter differently. There's a warmth to Spielberg that Kubrick does not have on any level.
Yep.
No, dude. If anything, like, Kubrick has this cold detachment from it's very intimate in a lot of ways, but it's almost like kind of like the God view of like the ant. Like
it's like the lizard eye looking at human relationships.
Right.
And yeah, I totally agree. I didn't. That's the reason why I didn't pull a trailer or anything from AI, because I really don't feel. It might have been a valiant effort and maybe a great tribute to an old friend on Steven Spielberg's part to go ahead and finish this movie. But this is not a Stanley Kubrick movie, so I didn't feel it would be appropriate for us to talk much about it.
For a second, dude, I'm like, why is Ted on the screen? I'm like, is that thing about to smoke some pot or something? I just ran through my head. I'm like, it's Ted. Why the fuck are we looking at fucking Ted? Then I'm like, okay, wait, no, it's AI.
And that's really where this all kind of wraps up. I wish that we had more from him about what his inner private thoughts were.
Died.
And you said you tried to look at that, but he's not really very candid about what's going on inside his mind.
No, he was very guarded about his process. He loved talking about the process of making movies from a detached standpoint. He loved talking about the films that he was currently working on. I think that the thing that I took away from this research more than anything that I hope to go forward with as somebody that makes things, not claiming to be a Kubrick.
Right. But that doesn't mean you can't draw inspiration.
Right, is that he was a staunch defender of his own work. And what that means to me is not what it means to some other people. Bullheadedness, pigheadedness, the inability to take criticism. What it means to me is that he put 100% of himself into what he did.
Yeah.
He left everything on the table. And I can't fault him for that, where some people do. Some people fault him for his hubris in that. They say he's, a conceited person, that he was way too congratulatory of his own work.
Look, I have no doubt that, based on the way that he treated people around him, oftentimes he clearly didn't care about causing people distress, causing people pain. If he thought that it was going to produce a better motion picture result, he was willing to put any sort of compassion on the back burner. As a result, he made some great films. Was he a great person? From some perspectives, probably not. But, at the end of the day, the work speaks for itself. And, I think that there's something tremendously personal about it. And I think that there's something in pretty much all of his films that can resonate with people on a human level, even if he was sort of an aloof person himself.
Well, I think what you're saying really speaks to the fact that why are we even talking about Stanley Kubrick? Because Stanley Kubrick didn't have this cultural impact. If he wasn't a figure that, even though, obviously very private, what he did, what he really wanted to be remembered, and what, like you said, I think you would hit the nail on the head perfectly with this episode, is he wanted his films to be remembered. Him as a person, I think that's why he shied away from it too, because he knew his work is how he should be remembered. If you want to know who Stanley Kubrick was, that's where you need to look. You don't need to have a conversation about Stanley Kubrick.
It's only fair for a guy that was intensely private and didn't like talking to the media and didn't like people prying into his personal business to give what he take what he's given us in terms of what was going on in his head.
I think he gave a lot more than most people do.
Yeah.
If you want to be perfectly honest, the sacrifice he had to make these films. The scale of them, the intensity, the preparation, because a lot of this is Stanley Kubrick would go to sets and light the sets before anyone was there. He was it started with him and it ended with him. And that's something that you have to respect, on whether you like his films or not, or you think they're boring schlock or whatever. I don't know how you have that interpretation, but some people do. I bet some people think Stanley Kubrick's films are shit. And that's fine. That you can have whatever opinion you like. But he poured his soul into what he made. And I agree with you. I think reading some interviews about him promoting films, that would be interesting, and maybe there's some insight that can be gleaned from that. But I don't think the same insight would have been gleaned.
No. A lot of, like I said, I watched several of them in preparation for this, and a lot of them were just very long 20-minute talks on the particulars of one of these movies that we covered tonight, and how much he enjoyed working with the actors, and how much he enjoyed making the film. And all of that is great if you're a fan of Stanley Kubrick's, but to understand him in the limited amount of time that we have, I think we did a better job just looking at what he made. So I hope that we did that tonight. And that's it, I think.
That's it, guys.
Yeah.
Let us know what you think in the comments section down below. And
become a patron.
If you want to see our take on Kurosawa this Friday, become a patron. Might as well just use it as a promotion since I put it out there anyway.
Yes,
or
indeed.
Coming soon, another episode of
Dank Dungeons and Drunken.
Stay tuned.
Dragons.
A very spicy episode, let's just say that.
Yeah, spicy.